Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys.
Hey, man.
Yes, and I'm aboard Dick Saban's private jet again. Not.
Looks like a stretch limo, and you're the
I
driver.
I just like this little virtual background here that AI generated for me, which is, of course, if you're looking on the or listening on the radio station or one of the audio only podcasts, you'll have to go over to the video version and see what we're talking about. That's pretty cool. But so if you missed last week's FairTax Power Radio, I would strongly suggest that you go back to the archive, both on the FairTax Guys YouTube channel. We also maintain a archive of these programs at Rumble.com. So go check that out. Really interesting discussion with the AFFT president, Steve Hayes, last week about a variety of subjects. We started out talking about the big, beautiful bill and just kind of ended up all over the place. And he's just such an interesting guy to talk to.
And the thing about it is that everybody's dancing around. How do we, you got the deficit. It's you're paying a lot of money on interest there. You've got the changes that are going to be coming to the tax code through the bill that just got passed. There are a lot of moving parts going on, and no one wants to say, I think the fair tax is the answer to a lot of our problems.
Oh,
Although
yeah.
that no one seems to want to go in that direction.
Oh, Marshall. Well, that's why we're here every week on FairTax Power Radio to try to push people in that direction. And one of the tools we use, of course, is to show people how crazy, how insane the Congress critters are when it comes to messing with the tax code. We did not get to do a Congress.gov segment last week. We don't do that when we have a guest, but we've got some good stuff this week. So if we may dive right in here and get into what the Congress critters are doing to the tax code, we will start with H.R. 4352, which is Representative Amelia Sykes of Ohio, to amend the Internal Revenue Code. Oh, mercy. Can you say class warfare in the tax code again? To deny interest and depreciation deductions for taxpayers owning 50 or more single family properties.
Well, that's just not fair.
Well, it is if you're of the mindset that if you're rich enough to own 50 more single family properties, you don't need all these breaks in the tax code. And so, but that's uh again, we talk about that all the time. There is so much in the tax code that has nothing to do with collecting revenue for the government. It has to do with pushing a particular political or social agenda. It has to do with picking winners and losers, who gets breaks and who doesn't. It's just crazy that the tax code does all of this other stuff besides just collecting revenue for the government like the fair tax would do. And we can get rid of all this kind of garbage and say replace it with a fair tax, and it's just this junk goes away. Stuff like this: deny interest and depreciation deductions if you own 50 or more single family properties. Uh, I rather doubt that will pass. If it does, I rather doubt the president will sign it. But again, it's just insane that there's this level of monkeying with the tax code trying to do that. 800 and I checked that 983 hits on our search in Congress.gov for bills that contain the string Internal Revenue Code. It just keeps going and going and going, and it needs to go away.
Yeah, it can go right on out the door. I'll lock the door behind it once it gets out. Yeah.
All right, leave us go on here on FairTax Power Radio with Congress.gov, HR 4327. This is we mentioned this last week. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene's bill trying to get rid of capital gains taxes on private home sales, to amend the Internal Revenue Code to eliminate the dollar limitations on the exclusion of gain from sales of principal residences and for other purposes. So again, that's Marjorie Taylor Greene saying there should be no capital gains tax on the sale of your home. Well, Ms. Greene, let me tell you, there should be no capital gains tax on the sale of any capital asset, be it precious metals, be it stocks and bonds, be it real estate, or be it real estate that's not your principal residence. the correct, as Steve said last week, the correct capital gains tax rate on anything is 0. So we need to get Miss Green back on the fair tax for this session of Congress.
And you and I talked about this a few weeks ago. It appears that, they're sort of pulling back because Virginia Fox, Representative North Carolina District 5, is essentially the same way, yet she's been a proponent and co-sponsor of the fair tax for many, many sessions, many.
All right, let's go on because we've got some cool stuff to get to on this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. HR 4280 is the next one. This is to amend the Internal Revenue Code, oh mercy, to make permanent certain expiring income tax rates and to establish a new top income tax rate. Again, the instability, the constantly changing nature of the tax code. First, it's temporary, then they want to make it permanent, but then somebody else wants to get rid of it entirely. The tax code is just in a constant state of flux, and that would not be the case with a fair tax. This is a Representative Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. So, I think we will just let that one lay without comment because there's so much more to get to. Next item up for bids is HR 4248 to amend the Internal Revenue Code, again, to apply an exclusion from gross income for compensation of certain school resource officers and the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 to make school resource officers eligible for public safety officer death benefits. Again, you can't have an income tax unless you can define what income is. And so now this again is, let's see, Representative Randy Weber of Texas is trying to say that this particular income isn't really income. Oh, and picking winners and losers. It applies to school resource officers, but nobody else. This kind of craziness goes away with a fair tax.
Yes, immediately, if not sooner.
All right, one more, HR 4243 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to allow qualified distributions from health savings accounts, certain home care expenses. Again, this is the government thinking that your money belongs to them until they've gotten their cut, out of it. So as long as you've got a health savings account or any other kind of tax deferred instrument, the government claims the right to tell you what you can and can't do with what's actually your money. But since it hasn't been taxed, we get to keep our grubby little hands on it and tell you what you can and can't do with it. But so this is Adrian Smith of Nebraska that wants to allow qualified distributions from health savings accounts for certain home care expenses. And I think that's about all we need to mess with on this time around for the Congress.gov.
Absolutely. I mean, they work real hard, and they're constantly, our congressmen, our elected representatives are constantly being sought after for special consideration. I'll leave it at that.
Let's move on here on this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. This is interesting. You hear so much about artificial intelligence and all this stuff. So last night I really didn't have anything better to do. So I asked Copilot, which is Microsoft's artificial intelligence application. I said, "Hey, Copilot, explain to me pros and cons of the fair tax." And it spit back some stuff for me. And as I expected, most of the cons that Copilot listed for the fair tax are not entirely accurate, because what they're actually doing, Copilot is actually just kind of giving back information that it found from other sources. So let's go through what Copilot, the artificial intelligence application, says are the cons of the fair tax. And I'll note that the source for each of these little things is, and there's one called connectusfund.org. I pulled that up. I found to my surprise that was not a political or an economic website. It was largely a religious website. And they maintain a large pros and cons section on a wide variety of issues at connectusfund.org. But right at the top of the list of what's wrong with the fair tax, according to Copilot, is the regressive impact on middle income earners. It said, quoting here, wealthier individuals save more and spend less proportionally, while middle-class families may spend most of their income and bear a heavier tax burden. That's the connectusfund.org was the source of that statement. But the truth is, folks, that's a red herring. It really is. It is indeed true that lower income families spend a greater percentage of their income than wealthy families do, but the percentage of your income that is spent with the fair tax is really an irrelevant point. What really counts with a fair tax is what percent of your family's spending is above the poverty level. Since all spending up to the poverty level is tax-free under the fair tax thanks to the prebate. So if we crunch a couple of numbers here, the 2025 poverty level for family of four, $32,150. Now, if you have a low-income family with a poverty level income right around that $32,000 mark, and they spend everything they make, this low-income family spends 100% of their income, they still pay nothing out of their own pocket. Every dime that they pay at the cash register is refunded to them in the prebate. So even though that family is spending 100% of their income, their tax rate is zero. So the percent of your income that gets spent is irrelevant. Don't get sidetracked with that kind of stuff. Now, I would note that with the current income tax, this family would pay at least 7.65% of their income in payroll taxes, because those apply to every dollar you earn, no standard deductions, no exclusions at all. So that family's much better off under the fair tax. But if you take a wealthy family, say this wealthy family only spends 40% of their income, but in doing so, they spend at 10 times the poverty level, which in this case would be $321,500. Now, they get the same prebate that the poor family does, but if you spend $321,500, you will pay $66,550.50 out of your own pocket. That's how much of your fair tax bill at the cash register is not reimbursed by the prebate. So you take that number, express that as a percentage of their total spending, and that wealthy family, even though they're only spending 40% of their income, they are paying a 20.7% tax rate. So again, do not get sidetracked into gauging the fair tax's impact on different families by looking just at what percentage of their income gets spent. The fair tax prebate renders that comparison totally irrelevant, but that hasn't stopped people from trying to use it. So it's quite possible that a family can spend 100% of its income and pay nothing under the fair tax. A different family can spend only 40% of its income and be taxed at a nearly 21% rate. Now, it's a side note as well. If a wealthy family is spending only 40% of its income, that means they're saving and or investing 60% of their income. And, economists all across the political spectrum, they all agree savings and investing is what drives a healthy economy. So a tax system that encourages saving and investing by not taxing it is beneficial to everyone. So the fair tax is not regressive. And the people who think it is, apparently connectusfund.org doesn't quite understand that.
Very, very true. This is rather insightful, considering every time I see a response from an artificial intelligence reply, it always disclaims accuracy.
Yeah, it does. Well, there were several other things that Copilot said is wrong with the fair tax. So the next one being a high effective tax rate. Go ahead and tackle that one if you would.
So from moneycrashers.com, the response was, though advertised as 23% inclusive, the actual exclusive rate is 30%, which could shock consumers at checkout. But it's like going to the gas station and you buy gas, the tax is inside that dollar amount that you see posted on the pump. First, there will be no shock and awe at the cash register. Unlike sales taxes that everyone is used to, the fair tax is like tax on gasoline, included in the price, not added on after the fact. If the price tag on an item says it's $100, you won't be charged $123 or $130 at the cash register. This argument keeps coming up all the time. Fair tax advocates quote the rate at 23% inclusive, because that's the way the income tax is quoted, since the fair tax is designed to replace the income tax quoting both rates the same way just makes for an apples to apples comparison. Thing is, with the FAIRtax, you're going to be able to see exactly how much money is in the cost of those goods relative to the tax. But just for the sake of our discussion today, we'll call the FAIRtax rate 30%. 30%. 2 points to consider. Number one, 30% is not the effective tax rate. Your effective tax rate under the FAIRtax is the amount of FAIRtax you paid out of your own pocket. That's not reimbursed by the prevate. That's the amount of money expressed as a percentage of your total income. As we showed in an example that we have before us, the poverty level family may have paid a 30% tax on everything they bought, but thanks to the prevate, they actually took nothing out of their own pocket and paid an effective tax rate of 0. When you calculate the FAIRtax rate as the amount you paid out of your own pocket expressed as a percentage of your total spending, middle class families will have an effective tax rate of around 10 to 15% with the FAIRtax. Only the Elon Musks of the world will have an effective tax rate anywhere near the full FAIRtax rate. And your tax can be calculated based on your spending activity. You can control it based on how much you spend, what you spend it on. So one of my favorite pieces of the benefits of the FAIRtax is that we end up encouraging saving as opposed to spending it. On a lot of people need more, so they're going to end up spending more, or want more. They're going to end up spending more on that. The FAIRtax is designed to replace the income tax. No one recoils in horror at the thought of a 30% income tax rate. In fact, there are a good number of people who think the top rate should be a lot higher than that. And of course, the way you get your income tax deducted from your paycheck means that the government gets paid prior to you being able to use your money to run your household and pay expenses.
Yeah, now, this was funny. Again, the FAIRtax, again, designed to replace the income tax. So it's reasonable to expect that the rates will be similar. As you mentioned a second ago, that the effective FAIRtax rate for most middle-class families is going to be about 10 to 15%. I asked Copilot a specific question: what effective tax rate middle-class families pay in income tax? And would you believe that with regard to the federal income tax, not looking at state or property taxes or anything else, middle-class families pay an effective income rate of, drum roll please, 10 to 15% with the income tax. So it's exactly the same, which is what you would expect when the FAIRtax is replacing the federal income tax. Let's move on now. This would really, we see this all the time when people try to argue against the FAIRtax. Copilot said the risk of tax evasion is one of the cons of the FAIRtax. Again, connectusfund.org is the source of this. They said a high sales tax may incentivize under-the-table transactions and cross-border shopping to avoid taxes. And you see this, you just have to say, wait a minute, they have no clue what they're talking about. We have just shown quite conclusively the FAIRtax rate is not excessively high. It sounds high. Now dishonest FAIRtax opponents will hammer the FAIRtax as being a 30% tax on everything you buy. And of course, that sounds high compared to the 6 and 7% sales taxes you're used to already, but they don't tell the rest of the story. Again, the actual out-of-pocket tax rate that most families will pay is nowhere near the full published rate, whether you call it 23 or 30%. You're not going to pay anywhere near that out of your own pocket. It's funny that I've never, have you ever heard the income tax described as a 30% tax on every dollar you make? No, because that's not the case. That just kind of shows a level of dishonesty that's leveled against the FAIRtax stuff. Now,
all set up in a headline form. You're going to be, you hear 30%, you're going to go, oh my gosh, I can't believe, the FAIRtax is going to, it's going to cost you 30%, but they don't say that it gets rid of the income tax necessarily in the same breath. And so we end up having to unravel a whole bunch of misconceptions every time we talk about the fair tax.
Yeah. Copilot mentioned something here that we talked with Jade Wally with a while back about making big ticket purchases abroad in order to evade the fair tax. I say we asked Jade to check into that, and he said that strategy for evading the fair tax just simply doesn't work. If you go to Sweden to buy a new Volvo in order to avoid the fair tax, that car eventually has to come back to the United States through a U.S. port, and at that point, when it's clearing customs and all, if it's determined that this is not a business purchase, the fair tax will be collected before the car is allowed to enter the United States. So you cannot evade the fair tax by buying your Volvo in Sweden and having it shipped back over here. You will have to pay the tax on it in order to get it through the port and into your driveway. And again, it's been pointed out several times that the great majority of retail sales in this country are made by a relatively small number of retailers. Think Amazon, Walmart, and Target versus the rest of the world, you know. Now those guys know the tax authorities are watching them. They are not going to risk getting busted by helping people evade the fair tax. In fact, they get paid a service fee for collecting and remitting the fair tax. So they're incentivized to collect it, not help people evade the thing. And, it's entirely possible. I will grant you this, that it's entirely possible when the fair tax is in place. Somebody somewhere may be trying to offer you, a tax-free refrigerator out of the back of a pickup truck.
Right.
Would you actually buy a refrigerator out of the back of somebody's pickup truck? But any black market that does spring up, and there may be some, but it's going to be incredibly small compared to the business, say, that Amazon and Walmart do. So the idea that there's going to be this huge black market to evade the fair tax is just not true at all. Again, we'll refer you back to this article we talked about a couple of weeks ago here on FTPR that Jade Wally wrote back in 2020. His conclusion was that the fair tax would reduce illegal tax evasion by about 95%. So again, if you're going to try to argue that the fair tax is a bad idea because people are going to evade it, in order for that to stick, you really have to show that it would be worse than the income tax. And, with the IRS admitting to $1 trillion a year tax gap between what's owed and what's collected, yeah, good luck with that one. Just not going to happen.
Well, and I think too that you're not going to necessarily risk getting caught for a pack of cigarettes or a Coca-Cola or buying a steak sandwich or something somewhere. You're going to go for the big ticket item. I think I'm going to try to evade the fair tax by purchasing this rocket ship, kind of thing. The variations, it's just not going to be an easy thing to do at a retail level. It just isn't.
Yeah, I tell you what, I don't think time is going to let us get through all of these little points that Copilot brought up. But they did bring up another one that we hear a lot. The fair tax is bad because it gets rid of the home mortgage interest deduction. It gets rid of the charitable giving deduction. All these targeted deductions and credits that go away with the fair tax is a reason not to enact it. And you say, sir?
Well, this one actually is comical when you think about it. Imagine that Burger King somehow reduced the price of the Whopper to zero. Yep. Whoppers are now free. Excuse me, I'll be right back. Now,
yeah, I'll take 18.
All right. Okay. I'll bring them right back to you. I'll ship them down there. They'll be there tomorrow morning. Now, imagine further that someone took to social media blasting that move on the grounds that it made all of his Burger King discount coupons absolutely worthless. Targeted deductions and credits only make the tax code more complicated and more unfair, as some people get the deductions and others do not. The fair tax is fair in that it treats everyone the same. No one pays taxes on their basic necessities. Beyond that, the more you spend, the more tax you pay. You are in control of your spending. You decide to save the money, there's no tax sitting in your bank account or in a savings account or a mutual fund or in investments and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Give to charity because they get a tax break. People give to charity because they want to support a cause. By letting people bring home 100% of their paycheck, the fair tax puts more money in people's pockets. And when people have more to give, they give more. Under
Yeah,
the FAIRtax, spending on education is not taxable. Education costs are projected to go down dramatically, with the FAIRtax making it more accessible to everyone. And again, when people have more, they save more. As noted earlier, the FAIRtax will encourage saving and investing by not taxing it. People will be able to save for retirement and for any other purpose, tax-free with the FAIRtax.
Oh, mercy. I tell you, we're about out of time here, so we're going to have to skip. Let me skip down to the bottom one. One of the things that Copilot said was wrong with the FAIRtax was uncertain revenue stability. Consumption can fluctuate more than income, potentially making federal revenue less predictable. That's from the collegeinvestor.com. That is just plain not so. I mean, it has been shown conclusively consumption is definitely a much more stable source of taxation than income. You know, when you lose your job, your income goes away, you still continue to buy things, you know, and if you lose your job, you can still rely on your savings. You can rely on borrowing. You can, go and get government assistance of some kind. When you tax income, there's only one source, and that's the income. When you tax consumption, there are multiple sources for funding that. But I thought it was funny that Copilot's, when I asked Copilot, what are the pros and cons of the FAIRtax, and it comes back with uncertain revenue stability as one of the cons. But then I ask it, all right, compare income and consumption as tax bases, and it comes back and says consumption is less volatile than income. People continue to spend even during economic downturns, especially on essentials like food, housing, and health care. Income, on the other hand, fluctuates more dramatically with employment levels, investment returns, and business cycles. This means the government can rely on a steadier stream of revenue from consumption taxes, like sales taxes are. So it says one thing when you ask it one question, it says something entirely different when you ask it a different question. But I just think it's fun to play with artificial intelligence sometimes, especially as it relates to the FAIRtax, and see what it comes up with. But I'm sure we can't get into any more stuff. We're about out of time. But excuse me, I've got a tickle in my throat. I need some cheerwine. Go ahead and wrap us up here.
Got cheerwine today. Product made in North Carolina. Bob Paxton's found it at the Publix down there in Ocala, Florida.
Oh yeah, I have, and I say that's going to wrap up this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. If you can, I mean, go ahead and just ask various different artificial intelligence applications. There's one on X, Copilot again, the Microsoft one, Chat GPT. They're all over out there. Just ask them to compare taxing income versus taxing consumption and see what they come up with. It would be interesting to see if you want to do that, and leaves a comment under the video. We'd like to check that out. But that's going to wrap up this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. Again, thank you so much for watching and listening and enjoying it, hopefully, and sharing the video with family and friends. That helps us a good bit. And we will see you again back here, same time, same station on the FAIRtax Power Radio next week. Until we meet again, I'm Bob Paxton.
Bob Scarborough.
We are the FAIRtax Guys, reminding you the FAIRtax is the only truly fair tax, and once you understand it,
we'll demand it.
So what would you do for her?
We've got several programs that will help her. We just need to find out how much she makes. But the good news is, the less she does, the more we can help.
Yeah.
If I may, with the FAIRtax, we wouldn't even tax her income. So the more she makes, the more she has.
But still, a consumption tax could eat up a lot of her income.
Which is why at the beginning of every month, we're actually going to give back all that she pays in taxes on basic necessities.
You're going to give her back her taxes?
Every month. On everything taxed on basic necessities. But we're also going to give it back to you and to every American citizen.
Why?
Well, we believe taxes should be fair.